All right, to go over your tank real quick. Sometimes you're gonna have a big number here, it's gonna be your emergency number. So if direct contact is not answering, whatever reason, you have an emergency, you can call that number. If you want it saved, you want to put it in your documents, you want your staff to know, especially anybody that's gonna be there often, like managers, because if you have to evacuate the building, you wanna be able to call that number and the fire department. The other things you're gonna know, a lot of these have decals on them. Decals that say like this, that have numbers on them, they're nice. They tell you what your PSI set point should be. So this one's maintain 25 PSI. This one's telling you how full it is, which is in inches, so 74 inches. This is telling you what reorder point is, which is that once it gets below 20, it's gonna tell them to resupply, come and do a fill. If this tank ever gets below 10 inches, it's normally not going to run sessions, especially on Arctics. It will not. It just doesn't have enough nitrogen to get to the system to run a session. So if you're ever like, man, it's not running sessions, what we're going to do, we're going to first come to this digital screen if yours has a digital. If not, I'm about to show you the other one, and it'll tell you how much you have. Right now 72. We know that's based off of a fill point here for like 70, what do we say, 74. We know this was likely just filled up recently, likely today or yesterday. But that will tell us our amount of nitrogen. That's what that digital screen's for. This screen, so if you don't have a digital screen for some reason, you're normally gonna have a gauge that's like similar to this. It's gonna tell you the similar thing, right in the 70 mark. It's a little harder to tell than a digital, obviously, because it's doing it by 20s. So you kinda have to break it down. But either way, that should pretty much match the digital screen, but that's same thing. If that gets below 10, you're likely not running nitrogen, and that's probably why your Arctic's not working. That's why we ask you to check this stuff. Your pressure gauge. This is gonna tell you how much PSI your tank is running at. So what all these hoses are running, and what's coming out of this tank right here, and to those points, to your EStops, that's what this pressure's telling you. And that's important because if we get below 20 PSI, this will not open up. This only opens up, this is your pneumatic actuator valve, which is your EStop valve. Yours is likely red or green, but if it is below 20, it will not open up usually. So 18 to 20 is about the cutoff range that these will not open up if your PSI gets below that. These will not open up if they get below 20 PSI, usually 20 PSI, or that is not getting power, which this is our EStop. This power goes to your EStop button. When it's pressed, it kills power to this. If you pressed it for a long time, like it has been off for a few minutes and 20 minutes, this normally gets cold. When you pull it, sometimes you'll hear it buzzing, and sometimes you'll just feel it get warmer and hot. Even though hot to touch, when you try to touch it, you don't want to keep your hand on it. Yours can also be, and is likely, a black little box that has a plug going to it, or a green little box that has like a red little top on it. But those are going to be, you're going to see the same thing on the idea that electrical is going to come in from the area that your Arctic is, so the wall itself. So between the power and 20 plus PSI, the EStop valve will open, and that little stem goes up and down based off of pushing the EStop. But if it's not adjusting based off of you pushing and pulling the EStop, which you can test it by literally coming out here and watching it while someone's pushing the button a few times, the press, release, and you don't see it go up and down, you know you're not getting, either you're not getting power to adjust from the EStop, or you don't have enough PSI to open it, or the last thing, which we hope is not the issue, is your pneumatic valve is faulty. But to find that out, we need to know that we're getting power here. So we're getting power to it to tell it to open when we pull the EStop. And then we need to have proper PSI coming from the tank, which that needs to be a 20 plus. So we come here, we look at it, and we can tell, all right, we're good on PSI, we're good to go. This one does it by the hundreds. Most of them do. So you'll kind of backtrack and you'll notice that big middle line is the 50. And so we can kind of go 50, 40, and then we're right below 30 on this one. But anytime you have an Arctic issue, come take a picture right here. That'll tell us what we need to know. It'll tell us the fill level, and it'll tell us how much PSI we have, which is ideal. What you'll also want to note is note on that what your normal PSI is. So if you even want to take a picture of this and send it to us because you don't quite understand what, by all means, please do that. That will help us as well. All right. I'm going to show you how to test to see if you're getting nitrogen past your pneumatic valve actuator valve. Like I was saying, yours is likely going to be green or red. This location is a little different, but not a big deal. That stem's going to be similar. You're going to see like a little spot open. It's going to have a stem below it, and you're going to see it up and down when it presses the E-stop. So you can first check to see if someone's pressing it, if it's going up and down. If it doesn't move a ton, just a little bit. But if you're at the point you're like, it looks like it's moving, we can do a test. We can do the test either way if you want, technically. So right now we have the E-stop pulled, which tells us we're getting power to there. And then this location does have enough nitrogen flow, so it should work. But we're gonna take our little local valve. I'm just gonna place it here. These are expensive. Don't be rough with them. That's why they did the 45-inch, 2-inch PVC pipe on the wall to protect it, because they're over $300 each time you have to buy the phase separator, which is that gold piece. It's brass, but a lot of people drop it on the concrete or the metal, and that's problematic. So we can do this test when our local fill valve is after the E-stop valve. So our pneumatic valve that shuts off right here, this is where nitrogen flow stops if we either don't have PSI or we press the E-stop button. That is assuming this is fully open. So you want to always check to make sure your main valve is fully open. Sometimes it's worth shutting it all the way off, like closing it fully and then opening it back up all the way fully. So to test this, we know this one can do it because the E-stop is before the local fill valve. If this valve was before that E-stop, this test does not work because it's going to run no matter what, even if your E-stop's off. So we're just trying to figure out if the E-stop works. What we do is just turn it. Turn it slightly. That sound's telling me we likely have pressure. If it lasts for like 20 to 30 seconds, you definitely know. And if you ever start hearing the nitrogen actually come out, you'll know that you have nitrogen flow past this point. So yeah, and there it is. All right, so we know nitrogen is getting past that point, meaning we know nitrogen, since it's getting past this, we know it's getting all the way through that line and to the machine itself. So most of the time Arctics. But if you have a Juca, you know that at that point it's working. If you were to start turning that and it started that sound and then it faded out and then just went silent, that tells you do not have nitrogen past this point. You know you're at least not getting it past this point. And what you need to figure out there is, one, if your E-stop is malfunctioning, meaning you're not getting powered here, or you can watch that stem and open and close. But if it is got power and you're seeing slight movement but you're not certain, go check your PSI on your tank. Let me go ahead and put this back so it doesn't fall off. But that's how it works, just slide it in. But you'll check your PSI on your tank. You'll make sure it's high enough. And then you're also going to check your fill level, make sure you have enough nitrogen to run sessions as well. But the PSI is important to know, and it's worth checking, if not daily, at least weekly. Anytime you're having an issue, definitely check it, but this should be something checked weekly, because the more you check it, the more you're going to be aware is if it's going up. Say if this one was at 45 or 50, we would want to contact our provider and get them to lower it back to our set point of 25 to 30. That way we don't mess with sensors, we don't overcool people, because the more pressure you're delivering through these lines, so the more pressure that's built up through these lines going through, the colder it's going to make it in most chambers. And often what that does is trip sensors, because it's reading that it is sending too much nitrogen flow into the area and cooling down way too fast, and often cooling way too low. So to recap, we have fill level, PSI gauge. Picture of that helps us out anytime you have an Arctic issue, especially if it's a running issue of how it runs. Also our fill level, which is usually easier to tell because it's digital. We have all the specs, which a lot of times are going to be confusing for most people. These are pretty easy to understand once you understand what they're saying, which is PSI, saying pressure, inches of nitrogen you have in it, and then the reorder point. Other than that, you'll have your sometimes a number there and that. I highly recommend creating something more simplistic of this. So the main things you want to know is your PSI, and then that if it's below 10 PSI, or sorry, if it's below 10 on your fill point digital scale, you won't run. And then whoever your main point of contact for your provider is, put it on a piece of paper, laminate it if it's outside, or put it outside by your door, your outside door you're going to your tank. Put it somewhere where your staff can read it. They can know what to expect on the PSI, so when they come out here, they can look at it and say, all right, we're good. Or if we ask them and they don't know how to read that gauge very well, they can take a picture of it. They can tell us what the PSI should be, and we can confirm or tell them they need to contact the provider. And if at that point, they would have that number as well, easily accessible. It'll make everything a lot quicker if you can call them and just say, hey, we're running too high, we're running too low, can you please come out? The only reason your PSI should ever jump up slightly is if you just get a fill. Sometimes it'll jump up to about 5 PSI and you'll hear it depressurizing throughout the day, and that's fine. But if it's jumping up and your Arctic is supposed to be at 25 and you're sitting at 32 to 40, anywhere past 30 really, you need to contact your provider and say, hey, we're supposed to be at a set point of 25. They'll come out likely that day. Sometimes the next day, if it's a weekend, it might be Monday. They'll come out and adjust it, and that way you don't have to worry about sensors being faulty. Same situation, if it's low, contact them, say, hey, we're at 20 PSI or we're at 18 PSI. We need to get this corrected. We can't run sessions. Please come out and do it. Same thing, it feels too low. If you have a weekend coming up and it's a Friday or it's a Thursday and you're already getting close to that 20 mark, you might contact them and say, hey, we have a big event coming up. Can you all do it and fill a little earlier this week? But if it gets below 10 and they haven't come and fill it, give them a call and say, hey, we're too low of nitrogen. We need to get a fill. But other than that, that's pretty much it.